my willingness is what led me to the truth about my family. And that ultimately led me to a very deep road of depression. I was depressed. I was suicidal because, like, man, I'd been trying to do right for so long. And I was even willing
Yeah.
to give up my life. I mean, I was willing to die for what I thought God wanted me to do. And
Well, welcome to the True Man Podcast. Now, do you ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, who am I? Are you sitting in traffic right now, listening to this podcast, wondering, who am I? Or do you ever find yourself sitting at your desk in the middle of the afternoon, just staring out the window, wondering, who the heck am I? Now, that question, I'm sure, hits a lot of guys. I know I've been that guy who asked that question. And based on the men I talk to, there is no doubt this is something that a lot of men ask themselves. So let's explore that further today. How about we? So welcome to the podcast, Nicholas Jordan Moore. He is an acclaimed author, a poet, and storyteller. His purpose on earth, and I love this, is to teach people the power of vulnerability, self-love, self-reflection, and forgiveness. Nicholas is here today to talk more about his memoir, Who Am I? Nicholas, welcome to the True Man Podcast.
hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me. Glad to be here.
Now, should we tell everybody where you are? I mean, this is like insane, guys. I mean, he's hanging out. This podcast it's March, but which is spring break time actually. So maybe folks are headed your direction. I don't know, but at the time of recording, it's quite cold here, and I would love to be out near Hawaii. So
I am living the dream. Living
yeah.
in Honolulu, about a mile and a half down the street from Waikiki Beach, and that's actually my home office every day. I am at the beach every day. It's sunny.
Well, there are things that suck worse, I guess.
It was a long road to get here, but
yeah, well, let's talk about that road. And I love the name of the book. I think it's from a men's perspective, I think it's a question that commonly gets asked, but like a lot of men, it didn't start with the book. We probably, as I've looked at your story, we probably have to circle all the way back to your childhood to how we get to where we're at today, don't we?
For sure. And that question, who am I? A lot of times, most of us, I would just say, generalizing in most cases, we all hope that we are a good person in general terms, that we're here to do something good, that we're good in the eyes of the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. But we all do things that aren't good sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when that question of who am I can really start coming back up. And in my book and in my life in general, I believe that reflection is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And if we can't truthfully reflect on the things that we have done that weren't great, or the people that we've hurt, then we're not going to be able to actually grow and mature past those hurdles.
Yeah, that is so true. I have a couple of men's retreats that I go to, and specifically at every retreat, we talk about a man's heart, and we gotta start with the woundedness, the hurt that's there, because you can't really move forward until you poke around a little bit, which isn't a lot of fun for most people, right? It isn't fun for anybody really, but if we're going to heal from pains and traumas and wounds, sometimes you got to poke around a little bit. So today we're going to poke around a little bit. Since you're willing to talk about it. So tell everybody how your life began, and maybe some of the traumas and woundiness, the wounds that you went through.
Sure. So I grew up in Texas. I was born in Baton Rouge, but we moved to Texas when I was 1. And I grew up in a very toxic masculine household. I didn't, of course, know that it was a toxic masculine household. It was
Right.
just normalcy to me. And it's not that my dad was ever extremely physically violent with me or anything of that sort. I was the youngest of three. I was very fortunate to kind of just coast on the easy street as my oldest brother and my sister kind of took the majority of the flack. I was somewhat the golden child. I made good grades in school. I was good at sports. So, hey, if you just keep on making good grades and keep on excelling at sports, then, great job.
Yeah.
But there were things that I learned early on from my dad. Um, and you just kind of soak some of these things in. We're just a big sponge. And some of those things were, all right, violence is not just something that you need to learn to protect yourself. It's actually something that's encouraged and
Wow.
that we look at as a positive thing. I never heard any negative stories from my dad growing up other than hard work stories that, he had to walk through the snow, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he did, he grew up in poverty in South Louisiana. So I know that he worked very, very hard, but he told me stories about getting in fights and being violent and some racist stories as well. Being in the segregated South.
Yeah.
If you grew up with white parents and you're around our age, then more than likely there's some level of racism
Hmm.
involved.
Right.
Um, so I grew up, learning that racism and violence were positive things. That hey, if I'm going to prepare you for the world, you need to be able to protect yourself in case violence comes around. And that's something that is innate within men in general. For
Yeah.
thousands of years, we've been the ones that needed to protect. So I'm not going to say that learning self-defense can't be an empowering thing, but it can be taken as a very negative thing as well. And in my case, my dad told me that, hey, don't be the one to start a fight. Don't do the push back and forth bit. Somebody starts pushing you, punch them in the face and don't stop until it's over. And I
And
took that advice to heart.
yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I did some, pretty messed up things in that regard. But the thing that I absorbed a lot of that I didn't really realize that I was absorbing was how I viewed women and, these
Mm,
things that we view as being a man. All right. So the three big pillars of manhood, the way that I saw it as I grew up was first of all, physical toughness. You got to show that you're not afraid of anything. Don't back down from a fight. You got to prove to my friends that I'm
yeah.
tough. Second, it's dominance over women that, hey, I can attract women. I like women and I've got, I don't respect women that much because, hey, I'm a man. I'm the one that's in charge. I'm the one that has everything figured out. And, they don't follow by the same rules as we have to. We are more lax. We get to be a little bit more explorative in our
Yeah.
sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for women to do that, that's a very negative thing.
Hmm.
So I was very concerned with the purity of my future wife or partner. But as far as my own purity, it's okay. I can mess around.
Yeah.
And then the third thing was, of course, this doesn't really come until, after you get out of high school. And, I went to college, played college football, and I thought I was going to be an NFL football player for a long time. I got my shot, but that didn't work out. And then it's making money. It's like, all right, how do I prove that I'm a man? I have to make a lot of money. And I was dead set. It's like, all right, I'm going to be a millionaire, but before I'm 35. So it was physical, that I'm not afraid to back down, never going to back down from a fight. I got to show that I'm brave. I got to show my dominance over women. And third thing is I need to make money. And those were the three real pillars that I thought were the most important aspects of being a man. And, growing up, I didn't realize that my household wasn't, I thought that I had a picture perfect family. I literally thought everything was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom ended up having an affair when I was in high school, and that grew into something that, I had some anger towards women for a little while, and I took it out on my
Mhm.
girlfriend, and I cheated on her. But ultimately, is the thing that really, and just for the listeners out there, I am going to lay some heavy information on y'all because I'm going to go ahead and fast forward.
Yeah.
Um, and this is about 8 years ago. So I was about 30, 31 years old when this happened. But 8 years ago, I called CPS, Child Protective Services, on my dad because I believe he molested my niece. And I also believe it happened to my sister growing up. And I believe that it started with my niece when she was 2.5 years old. She was 9 at the time that I saw something, and she covered it up right away. And some regard, I believe that my sister has somewhat, either consciously, unconsciously, more unconsciously than anything, protected my dad from, the accusation on her daughter. My brother refuses to believe it. My mom's still with my dad. I got a cease and desist letter from my dad and brother when my book first came out. So, I looked up to my dad growing up. He was controlling, but he's the one that helped me become the football player I became. He's the one that taught me the value of hard work. My dad, my friends loved my dad.
Yeah.
He was funny, and then, fast forward in life, and my whole life feels like an entire lie. And I jump into a really deep, dark depression, and I eventually found my way out of that. But and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit in the story because I'll go back because of, something that happened when I was 16 is ultimately what led me to the truth about my dad. But I believe that my dad has to be him for me to be me. I wouldn't have this book to share with the world if my dad isn't who he is. My book's already bringing a lot of healing, and it's helping a lot of people, men and women both. And if my dad wasn't who he is, I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't have this poetry to share with people. And my book is a lot bigger than just my family. Yes, is it bringing some heartache to lots of members of my family? Sure. But in the big picture, I believe that I'm looking at another one of my family members right now, and you, Mike, and everybody that's listening.
Yeah.
I see us as that we're all in this together.
Well, we are in this together. I believe that as well. I just want to circle back here. So what? There's a lot to unpack here. Tell me, at the age of 31, you called Childhood Protective Services. What? And I think this is common, right? Childhood traumas that occur, things that we see, they come back in our adult life in certain ways, and a lot of times when we least expect it, right? What happened, or what did you remember at the age of 31 that just triggered you to go, whoa, something is sideways here and doesn't feel right?
Sure. So there was something that was swept under the rug when my niece was 2.5. I came home from Thanksgiving one day, and my mom, my sister-in-law, my brother, and my dad were all in the kitchen. And I get home, it's Thanksgiving, and it's a frantic scene in the kitchen. And my mom comes up to me. She's like, "You're never going to believe this." And she said that my sister and her husband were at their house, and they were giving their daughter a bath. And their daughter said their JJ hurt. And when asked why, she replied with, "Papa poked me."
Mm.
And this was, of course, shocking. But, within a day, it had been discounted to, hey, it had to do with drugs. They were trying to bribe my parents to give them money, or, some elaborate story. But my sister was saying that it did not happen. So, whew, I was like a big, deep breath, of fresh air. Like, okay, if Abby's saying it didn't happen, then I can just let that go. And, the other family members are saying, okay, it didn't happen. It had to do with drugs or whatever. But there were some other small things that, like being at my brother's house for a party one time. I mean, my dad was very different with my sister's daughter than he was with my brother's daughter. My brother has a strong family. He's a good dad. He's got a strong mom. And my sister, on the other hand, has been an addict for the majority of her life. And
Mm.
her husband, her ex-husband, had addiction issues as well. And it's, no secret that they prey on the ones that are
Vulnerable.
most
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so, at that party, even one of my brother's neighbors came up to my brother at one point during the party. He's like, "What's up with that old guy following that little girl around?" I mean, he would just stay with her all the time, and we
Yeah.
always thought it was a little weird. But then years later, so that was when she was 2.5, and got swept under the rug, and I end up moving back in with my parents because at this point I'm switching careers and I'm studying to become a high school math teacher, and I'm getting something out of the refrigerator, and my niece is staying with us at that point. And as I'm closing the refrigerator door, he's walking from the garage, and he puts his left arm around the chair that she's in. She's in a bar stool or like in a chair,
Mm-hmm.
and her knees are up against the bar, and I'm on the other side of the bar. So I can just see how she's sitting, and she's on the end. And my dad puts his arm around her, and he pokes underneath her legs somewhere, like I didn't know exactly where his finger went, but I 100% saw that he with his pointer finger poked underneath this area, and she screamed bloody murder. She's looking at me right in the eyes. She's blushing. And he said, "What are you screaming like that for?" And I was like, "Because you just poked her real hard." I didn't say that he poked her
Yeah.
in a private part. I just saw that I was hoping, maybe it was underneath her leg and it just hurt her leg or something like that. And she didn't say anything. A few seconds go by and she screams again, but this time it's a total fake scream. Sounded nothing like the first scream. And he goes, "See, look, there she goes. She's screaming again. See, I didn't do nothing." And my mind's racing. I'm like, what do you, I
What
100%
just
saw him poke her. Like, why? First of all, why is he saying that he didn't poke her? I saw him poke her. And why did she just scream again to cover it up? And so I just go sit back down and start acting like I'm studying, because I'm just staring at a book, trying to process what just happened. And then, I slept on it that night. I woke up the next morning still feeling sick to my stomach. I had to go talk to my sister-in-law and talk to my sister. I got the story from when she was 2.5 and found out that did actually happen, and found out that, yeah, there's some more intricacies to that
yeah.
story. But yeah, I'm gonna get pretty wild on you here, but I would have never moved back in with my parents, and I would have never found out about my dad unless I would have read a Christian book for men that was ultimately, it was called Wild at Heart. I'm not sure if you ever read it, by John Eldridge.
John Eldridge. We commonly talk about John and recommend that book for sure. Yeah.
It's a good book,
What's better than
and
that?
it it well, some people are gonna be like, "Well, I don't know if anybody should read that book once you get what it gave me," because it gave me the green light to commit a murder.
Now
If
that
I
one I didn't
wouldn't,
see coming.
yep. So I'm gonna rewind on you a little bit, because my life and my book and my whole purpose on earth is to really help people understand the power of vulnerability and really step more into their vulnerability.
Yeah.
Mike, the first thing that I had to come to terms with and to be honest about, that ultimately led me where I am today, is reflecting back on when I first had sex. I was 16 years old. I'd been with my girlfriend for over a year. She grew up Church of Christ, which is a very strict form of Christianity.
Right.
We'd been talking about sex. She said that she might be ready after a year, but she still wasn't ready. And I was trying to convince her. And, we were doing all sorts of other sexual acts. And one day in the bedroom, and I'm trying to convince her, and she tells me no a couple times. And then I, I'm trying to convince her a little bit more. And then I take her silence as consent. Within 10 seconds of that, I finish and I immediately realized that she was not happy. Like, she starts crying. I couldn't believe what I just did.
Yeah.
So the first time that I had sex in, if we just want to put it and really say it how it is, in many ways, you can say I raped my girlfriend. And I held a lot of shame and guilt about that for a long time. I mean, that night, we ended up having consensual sex because that was the only way that we felt like we could make it better. We were both in love with each other, kitty love, whatever we're going to say. We stayed together for 3.5 years. I broke up with her because my brother told me not to bring a girlfriend to college. I was still in love with this girl. I always thought that she would be the one that I would eventually marry. And, because of her upbringing, that, if she didn't marry the person that she had sex with, she's going to hell. And she had her, she didn't always see eye to eye with church, but she was, she didn't know. Her parents were strong in it, and it sent her down a path of destruction. And she ended up becoming an alcoholic and taking pills during the day. And years and years go by, and I always thought that, she might be the one that I would come back to. And I didn't realize that she had spiraled so deeply. And years later, she ends up in a relationship. I knew that she was in a relationship that she wasn't happy about. I knew that it was with a guy that was not a good guy. She called me one time. She was walking down the street, said that he had hit her. But this was when I was in college. She wouldn't tell me where they were. Like, I wanted to do something, but couldn't. Her brother knows that she's with a bad guy. Next thing I know, she's married to this guy. Well, she got pregnant. So they got married. And that's when I'm like, okay, I guess I need to go find a wife, because I thought this was going to be, I had her on the back burner. And now
Yeah.
I'm freaking out. I need to find a wife quick. And then, of course, I got married. That was a quick, bad decision for a year. And then as I'm getting divorced, I reach back out to her and I find out, okay, she's going through postpartum depression for the second time. She was weighing 90 something pounds. Her hair was falling out. She was a shell of a person to talk to. She couldn't even think for herself anymore. And I'm hearing these stories of this man slamming her head on the tile floor.
Ah,
And she is literally afraid for her and her 2 kids' lives. And she's sleeping in the guest bedroom with her dresser pushed up against the door. And I'm sitting here just like, dude, we have to get her out. I go to her brother. I go to her parents. I'm trying to game. Her brother's on the same page as I am. Her parents are very timid and just, she's married, that's their thing,
yeah.
just kind of hands off. But ultimately, I felt responsible for
Yeah.
her being in this situation. I mean,
I was going to ask you.
from what happened when I was
Yeah.
16, all of this led her to be in this situation, and I'm the one responsible. And for a long time, I remember laying in bed countless nights, just like trying to game plan, trying to think. I sent her a letter, like trying to game plan for her to get out somehow. I wanted to go down there and kill the guy or beat the guy to a pulp, but what good was that going to do? And killing a guy, as Christian, that's not right. You can't murder somebody.
Right.
So I was at my wit's end, and man, I just didn't know what to do. And at this time, I was a financial planner. I was in the financial services industry for about 8 years straight out of college. And one of my clients, he represents, or I mean, he told me about Wild at Heart, and he didn't really know about my situation. He didn't tell me this because he thought, hey, Nick's not sleeping at night because he feels a lot of shame and guilt for, what he did when he was 16, and, he doesn't know what to do. But he told me about this book, and I was like, all right, a Christian book for men, I'm down. Like, this is what I need. I was a strong Christian. And in my book, you'll read quotes from John's book and what's going through my head. My favorite all-time movie growing up, I watched it all the time, was Braveheart. And I don't know if you remember too much
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
Wild at Heart, but he talks about Braveheart a lot, William Wallace. And
Yeah.
And it's all about sacrificing ourselves. And, at the beginning of the book, he's like, men don't need, advice. We need permission to go out there and be men. And it's all about self-sacrifice, like giving your life up, being willing to die for something bigger than ourselves. And Mike, this was the first time I ever felt real freedom. Like, I remember I was sitting in my living room of my apartment, and I started crying and I started getting goosebumps. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, and it's like, and it took towards the end of the book, and there was a quote from Galatians at the end of the book, and it's something to the extent that legalism only gets in the way sometimes, or something like that. That legalism can only stand in the way of, of what God really wants sometimes. And I was like, oh my God, like, I'm supposed to give up my life in Texas. If you get caught with premeditated murder, you're getting executed. I was 100% content with going to prison for the rest of my life, and I was 100% content with being executed. I was going to try to get away with it. Like, you'll read exactly my plan. I went and scouted the guy 2 nights in a like, I knew what time his garage door opened up on Saturdays. I was literally waiting on a gun from the black market, and I found out from my friends or my parents' neighbor that she had gotten out. And, of course, that's a big relief to me. It's like, but
Yeah.
so that entire time I'd been a financial planner. I quit my financial planning job to go become a teacher because I thought that would look good in court. Like, no, I'm not planning a murder. I moved back in with my parents. I'm saving money. I'm becoming a teacher. I'm changing
So
careers.
let me circle back here. So
Yeah.
you were charged with murder? Did you
No,
actually
no, no.
kill this guy?
No. I
No.
never. So she ended up getting out while I was waiting on a gun.
Okay.
I had planned it out. I knew what I was going to do. And I had paid $750 for a unmarked gun from the
I
black
got you.
market from a guy, and the gun never ended up coming. But I find out from my parents' neighbor one day, who's a retired attorney, who I had given her his information at some point. And, we go to a dinner, and he's like, "Hey, your friend's out." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, your ex-girlfriend from high school. She left that guy." I was like, "What?" I was like, "Oh my God." Like, so then I just changed my careers. I moved back in with my parents. I'd been working on that career for a long time.
Went back
I
to the
built it up.
parents again, even though you knew some of this stuff that had gone on.
No, 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 no. So that's
This,
how I found out.
that's
I
just how
would
you
have,
found out. Okay, I got you. I got you.
I would have never
But
found out about my dad. I would have
by
never
the way, I do
moved
want to
back in with him.
recommend. I do want to say this. I do think this is important. John Eldridge's book, Wild at Heart, is an incredibly valuable book. But I honestly think the best way to do it, personally, is not necessarily solo. I think it's great. I think it's a great book to go in groups so that you can talk through some of those topics. Because I have had other men tell me, "Ooh, Wild at Heart, man, that screwed up a lot of guys." And I've always been like, "Well, how could that screw up a bunch of guys?" Because I went through it in groups. That's how I've done it.
Mhm.
And I've always recommended in the reading of it. I say to a lot of guys, "Hey, Wild at Heart, awesome book. I'll read a chapter at a time with you and we can discuss." And because like anything, things can be taken out of context if, for not, but fabulous book. So I just want to throw that recommendation out to people because I give that book out as a recommendation quite often.
And the disclaimer, I am absolutely certain that John would be like, "No, that is not what I wanted you to take from the book. You should not go out and murder
Okay,
somebody."
right.
And I knew that. But
Yeah, no
in my
question.
being, it was as clear as a message as I've ever received. And of course, many people have done horrendous things throughout human history in regard to, hey, God's telling me to do this. And,
Yeah.
you know, but, I wasn't meant to actually hurt anyone. But my willingness is what led me to the truth about my family. And that ultimately led me to a very deep road of depression. I was depressed. I was suicidal because, like, man, I'd been trying to do right for so long. And I was even willing
Yeah.
to give up my life. I mean, I was willing to die for what I thought God wanted me to do. And now, my whole life feels like a lie. Like, what is the point of all of this suffering? Like, I just couldn't find an answer. And, then I'm teaching high school geometry in Grapevine, Texas. And, my students and kids that I coach, they wouldn't have known that I was depressed. I'm pretty good at staying positive on the outside, but on the inside, like I'm trying to figure out the point of life. Like, what is
Right.
the point of all this? And one of my friends suggested magic mushrooms for the first time, not because he knew that I was severely depressed. He just had been talking about mushrooms for a long time. And I tried, I tried
Hey,
them
dude.
once in college,
Yeah.
and they didn't. In college, I didn't quite take enough, so I didn't never really get the full experience. But this time,
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, dude, I'll try anything. I don't care. And we did the right amount. And that was the first night that I started asking myself, who am I? I remember lying down on my porch swing as I'm getting these close-eyed visuals for the first time. And I'm crying, and I'm just like, I felt like I was interacting with the universe, God, whatever you call it. Like, I'm really at my lowest of lows. I need some direction. Like, what is the point of all of this continual suffering? Why would a good God create pedophilia? Why would a good God create all
Yeah.
of us if we're just going to sit down here and suffer? And like, this is not good for anybody.
Yeah. So what did
And
you find out?
yeah, so that night, I ended up at the end of the night, I was looking in the mirror more suicidal than I'd ever been.
Mm.
And the next day, I remembered that a friend of mine who had tried to commit suicide in college, he has a big scar. He was almost successful. Um, and I don't want to say that's a success, but you know what I mean.
It was a close
Um,
call.
right. And one of my friends walked in, and they saved him. But he experimented with a molecule called DMT. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that, or if you've heard of anybody experimenting with ayahuasca.
I've heard of, yeah.
So DMT is the strongest psychedelic known to man. And after that first mushroom trip, I was, yeah, like, I felt like something had opened up, but I didn't get the answers I was looking for. I wanted more. I wanted it deeper. I didn't care. I was suicidal at this point, so I didn't care. And what I had heard about this molecule DMT is that they said that it was the molecule that they believed that releases when you die. And a year before this, I was like, my scientific mind, I'm like, okay, that's impossible to know that. So no thanks. And yeah, second of all, I wasn't depressed. So I'm like, I have absolutely no interest in trying that. I'm good. Y'all can do with whatever y'all want with these crazy, weird molecules and drugs, whatever you want to call it. But fast forward, and I am at my wit's end. My whole life fell apart. My family is pissed off at me. Like, everything just is in shambles. So I learned from a friend, and I ended up ordering some plant material, and I ended up extracting my own DMT in my kitchen while I was teaching high school geometry. And if you smoke DMT, Mike, it's only a 10 to 15-minute experience. So you're talking a very, very short window of time. The first time I ever smoked DMT, I went in pissed off at God. Like, I want
Yeah.
answers. What is the point of all this? I came back, one of, I mean, all questions answered. I was happy. I was like, okay, God, we are good. I didn't know that I was going to be writing this book. I didn't know that I was going to have this poetry to share with people, but I knew without a doubt that I was given some information and that I had a purpose to be alive and that everything was a-okay. Like, my dad has to be him for me to be me. Again, I didn't know what my purpose was going to be. I didn't know what I was going to do with this enlightening experience, this information that I was given. But I knew without a shadow of a doubt in my own being that, okay, everything is fine. It's all going to be okay. Everything has a purpose. If my dad wasn't the monster that, and I say monster, even the worst people in the world still have good sides to them. Um,
Yeah.
but if he wasn't that, which in all, measures of society, we look at that as one of, if not the worst possible thing that you can do or be. And I knew that if he wasn't that, then I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
I still detect a lot of pain. There's still a lot of pain there,
Hmm.
isn't there?
Um, there's a small amount, mainly just because I mean, the majority. I just got to talk to my mom the other day, which just felt really,
Okay.
really good. I hadn't talked to her since my book came out. Because when my book first came out, yeah,
They were
I
like,
got
you
the
threw
cease
him
and
under the
desist
bus,
letter.
right?
Yeah, and then, I
Yeah.
look at it as so much bigger than just my family. But Mike, honestly, I believe I'm one of the happiest people alive, and I've been that way for quite some time. And it's not just a facade. Like the people that are around me, I have people reaching out to me all the time, telling me about the positive impact that I'm making on their lives. And,
How do you
you
get to
know,
the point, Nick? I think a lot of people maybe if they're listening to this right now, they're going, okay, well, this is awesome. So you're happy now. How are you able to reconcile all of that stuff that went on and get to a point of happiness?
the first step, Mike, was really zooming out and realizing that, okay, I'm not defined by my past. Our childhood, our
Yeah.
environment shapes a lot of who we are.
Yep.
And letting go of the opinions of others isn't a very incredibly hard thing to do. And one of the most difficult opinions to let go of is typically our parents.
For sure.
And I say that I'm fortunate to have my family situation. Of course, like, yeah, there was a lot of pain there, but I was forced to not care about what my parents thought. And once you stop caring about what your parents think, it lifts away to like, okay, then I can just be whatever I want. And if you have a good heart, if you're really trying to do something good in the world and you're just following that, they're like, all right, if I just keep on trying to do right in the eyes of God, you know, or whatever you want to call it, then everything's going to work out. And if you just training that voice in your head is one of the most important things that you can do. And just because you have an enlightening experience or you wake up and like, all right, everything's fine, does not mean at all that life is just going to get easy. Life is not meant to be easy. The ups and downs never stop. We all
Right.
think that, all right, once I get this job or once I get this woman or once I have my first child or once I get this promotion, that everything's just going to get easier and then I can just relax and everything's going to be fine. That is simply not how life works. The ups and downs never stop. It's all about having perspective on those ups and downs and being able to ride those waves as gracefully as possible. So, Mike, I have a beautiful life in Hawaii. I'm still in debt. I work 7 days a week. I'm hustling. My book just came out in September, so it's the very beginning, and I'm having people reach out to me and telling me that it's making a positive impact on them, men and women alike. But there's lots of things that I could choose to be unhappy about.
Yeah.
But if you can take that perspective that this little life is so minuscule in the big picture, like literally, this is a blip in time. And if we
Yeah. For
can
sure.
try to see things from a higher perspective that, all right, my family really shaped who I was in these first years. If we can really, truly, honestly reflect on how some of those things shaped us, all right, do I have any sort of racist beliefs still that maybe were instilled to me by my parents? Do I have any sexist beliefs still that maybe were, you know, given to me by my environment? How did my friends shape my perspectives?
Yeah.
And really being honest about those things, because I dig into some subjects that most people just don't touch on. Like,
You hit a bunch of them on here.
I mean, so one of them, I'm just thinking about that, in the regard of racism and insecurity, you know, I almost, wasn't in a relationship with my ex-wife because of what my friend's opinion of her, because she had dated some black guys. So in my view of the world back then, all right, well, if you date black guys, then that means you must be slutty or you like guys with big dicks. And then, there's these connections, which is just another form of racism.
Yes.
And we as guys put so much value on the size we are and things like that, that it's so unimportant.
Well,
And
it's all that toxic masculine. I mean,
yep,
that description
yep.
is really is about having that toxic masculinity thing, and that's not what being I always call it a true man, because we're true man pie. What a true man's all about. I like to think that a man can define a true man however they want, but you touched on a lot of subjects today that are very toxic. And it seems to me what we need more of in this world is love. I don't care whether you're black, white, what your color is. I've learned not to even really worry about what the background is. I'm more curious about how they want to move forward in life, because backgrounds like you're talking about do nothing more than hold you back. And if you're going to move forward in life, you got to have that self-awareness to overcome some of that baggage. And I know that's not easy. If it was, you wouldn't have the story that you do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's beautiful. So tell everybody where you're at with the book and how you're getting this out there, because it sounds like you spend a lot of time walking the beaches and selling the books in Hawaii, which is kind of epic.
Yeah. So, of course, I have done some podcasts like this to promote, but the number one way that I connect with people is I was living on the Big Island, which is actually called Hawaii, which most people don't know that. And that's different from Honolulu. Honolulu is on the island of Oahu. So I lived over there on the Big Island for about 3 years, published my book, and then I relocated to Oahu, to Honolulu, because I had this idea. Is like I've always known that ever since I started writing my book, that my book would be a success. I had absolutely no doubt about that, because I simply, I'm very fortunate to have the ability to write, but also my story is incredibly vulnerable, and I just put things
Yeah.
out there that just most people aren't talking about. And so I believed in myself. I have a quote of my own that it only takes one person to believe in you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's got to be you. So
Yeah. Truth, brother.
um,
Truth.
I knew it would be a success. I had no idea what that success would look like. So I took out loans from friends. I mean, I bet on myself. I relocated. I shipped my car over to the Wahoo, and I got a sign that says free poetry. And every day that it's sunny, I am out on the Waikiki Strip, either sitting on a rock wall with my free poetry sign. And I also did get a new sign that says meet the author. So I have a couple different signs now. And either I'm sitting there with my meet the author sign and people are coming up to me and, just having conversations, and I'm signing books for people, or I'm walking up and down the beach with this big sign that says free poetry.
I love it.
And of course, many people don't know, what I'm doing with that. They're confused, or, people a lot of times fear what they don't understand.
Yeah.
And you would like this too, Mike. So before I moved to Oahu, I was knocking door to door on the Big Island. It's not like I've ever heard of anybody else doing this, and especially like the free poetry thing. I'm a big believer that your greatest gifts are something incredibly unique. Like if you're trying to emulate somebody else, you're holding yourself back.
Yeah.
Just because you don't see somebody else doing it doesn't mean that it can't be done. And right now, I average about 8 to 10 books a day on a sunny day selling books. And I'm getting people reaching out to me almost every day, either on social media or email, or they're leaving Amazon reviews. that my book is helping them in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
And Mike, a big part of my book, it's not just my story. At the end of each chapter, there's multiple reflection questions. So it is interactive. I'm going to ask the reader to reflect on their own life, and I'm going to ask some heavy questions. Like, the one at the end of my virginity chapter is, have you ever done anything that you thought you were incapable of doing? And I think that most of us have some sort of situation that we've done something that we did not
Yeah.
think we were capable of.
Yeah.
And, it's really going to ask you to dig into what brought you to where you are today and all the intricacies of this existence. And it's not easy, but I'm very, very fortunate that I have the determination. My biggest goal in life is to bring as much positivity and light into the world as I can. More forgiveness, more understanding, and self-love, Mike, is a big thing that's been coined over the last 10 to 15 years. But people a lot of times forget that we can only love ourselves as deeply as we can forgive ourselves.
Yeah. It's so true.
So if I wouldn't have owned up to that situation that happened, me losing my virginity, that would have, I believe, come back in some form or fashion and stayed with me. I believe that we're not defined by our past, but that the past will continue to define us in some way if we aren't able to actually reflect on it, own up to it, be real about it. Yes, I did this. It was wrong. I'm trying to be better,
Yeah.
and gotta be real about it.
100%. Nick, tell everybody, how can they find you? How can they get a hold of the book? And of course, we'll put all this information in the show notes so they can get a copy of your book. But tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so it's on Amazon and it's also on Audible. So if you aren't much of a reader and you like to listen and you want to listen to me read to you for about 8.5 hours, then you can get it on Audible. But the title of the book is Who Am I? The subtitle is Vulnerability Equals Powerability. I'll give you a quick picture of it here. There's one of my cards, but that is the cover of the book.
There you go. A very gritty picture. Yeah, I got to say, I love it.
It's black sand from the Big Island, and I write
There
about
you
that
go.
beach.
And now I know. Now I know what he did. Okay.
I thought the book was over before I ever came to Hawaii, and there's 3 Hawaii chapters where a lot of things come full circle. But you can find me on Instagram, Poet of Waikiki. It's just at Poet of Waikiki. And if you search my full name, Nicholas Jordan Moore, you'll find Instagram, you'll find a website, and TikTok, Nicholas Jordan Moore.
Yep.
But reach out to me. I'd love to hear about people's experiences. That's one of my favorite aspects of doing this, is hearing how it's positively affecting people's lives. And I just want to encourage everybody to start small, like find someone. If you have something that you have shame or guilt about, find somebody to talk to and open
Yes.
up to them about it.
Amen.
It will deepen your relationship with that person. It's going to give them permission to open up to you about something that they may have shame or guilt about. I've had so many people open up to me about things that I would never have known unless I would have shared my story with them. And now they have had their weight lifted because, oh my God, I'm human too. We all have things.
Yeah. 100%.
So yeah.
It may be unique to you, but not unique. And it's important to talk about these things for sure. Nick,
Yep.
Thank you for being on the True Man podcast. It was a pleasure talking with you and hearing your story. And I think it's got, you can help a lot of people by telling that story. So thank you for being vulnerable and authentic and real and talking about, some of the subject matter.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it. And yeah, you're doing something important. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, Mike.